Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue on with our journey and discussion with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2021. And that brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion at Spy Number 1071. This is a film from 1991. The filmmaker is Albert Brooks, and the name of the work is Defending Your Life. From 1991, and it stars, among others, in its really great, splendid cast, Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep and Lee Grant and Rip Torn, and it is written and directed by Albert Brooks. This is called Defending Your Life. It's a fascinating tale, and it has a plot or story which perhaps could be described as being about this particular character played by Albert Brooks, who is, we understand, working in the world of advertising when we first meet him. And right at the very opening, we see certain circumstances and the suddenness of a situation that he confronts or that confronts him, thus leading to his death, and thus a vision or a conceit or conception or construction in cinematic terms in the hands of Albert Brooks of the afterlife. And therein, I think, lies the great and wonderfully set up perspective of this film, Defending Your Life. Because what we then see is a story about this particular man, Albert Brooks' character, in this type of afterlife, which is called Judgment City in the film. And the point, or one of the goals of this place, is as a type of judgment process, a tribunal of sorts, where each person that crosses over into the afterlife, before he or she is able to go to the next level, the next world, as it were, he or she must undergo a type of trial or tribunal review of certain points of one's life. And if one can prove or show to this particular tribunal that one has not exhibited fear during the course of his or her life, then that is a type of showing, or that is a type of proof of validity, if you will, and the permission would be granted for someone to then go on to the next stage or the next world, what lies beyond, as it were. So here we have a story that is in this type of purgatory area, again, as constructed or as presented by the mind and vision of Albert Brooks. So this is the story or conceit, and so the Albert Brooks character is found to be in this place, and he has to undergo, over a series of days, a type of trial. And we review, or we as viewers see moments of his life before our very eyes in this trial process, which is a very clever conceit in itself, by the way. And through this process, we get to know a little bit about him, and also certain important points of his past life and how he dealt with those, and the type of back and forth discussion and debate, sometimes heated debate, as to whether this particular character showed fear in these moments of his life or not, and whether those showings of fear are to a level that are insurmountable, to the point where he has to be refused access to the afterlife, or to the world beyond, and thus he would have to return to Earth. So herein lies the wonderful metaphor or conceit or presentation of this type of world between worlds, this type of place where one is to be subjected to a type of judgment. In this type of world that is created for purposes of this film, we see hotels, we see a city of sorts that has these places of waiting rooms, we have advertisements for bowling, we have TV sets that are on and that show interesting types of afterlife related soap operas. We have all-you-can-eat places where one can eat without any kind of fear of consequence, as it were. So high-calorie diets or meals that taste delicious can be eaten and can be enjoyed to the fullest. And we also have the process, if you will, of the tribunal, a type of bureaucratic process that's presented. And we have a type of defense counsel as well as a prosecution side, and we have judges, and you have a presentation of the past life moments on screen that are shown in court. And so it's like looking into a movie theater, as well as setting up a type of trial process. And also along the way, we have the Albert Brooks character in this mode, this afterlife type of mode, and he meets a number of characters, included in which are, the Meryl Streep character. And she is in a similar situation as he, being someone who has also undergone something in her life, thus causing her to pass on into the next stage, as it were. And before she can move on, she too has to undergo her own particular tribunal review process, and that's what she does. And so she meets the Albert Brooks character, and therein lies another story or subplot involving their relationship and the type of romance that may result along the way. And so we have many different strands, I would suggest, that are going on at once within this incredibly clever and very funny and witty film. So in that very brief discussion, I would like to suggest that this film is many things at once. It is a type of romantic comedy. It is a very funny film due to Albert Brooks's great comic timing and the situational comic scenes that we see him and other characters experience. And so it's also a type of courtroom drama in a certain sense of that term, because we do have this conceit of the tribunal process, judges and prosecutors and defense in a manner of speaking. So it's a type of courtroom drama process. And so in that sense, we have maybe heroes and villains in a very traditional sense of the word, and people who are subjecting the Albert Brooks character to a type of scrutiny or judgment process, and maybe even judging him and the types of choices that he has made over the course of his life. Also, we have this wonderful construction or contemplation of the afterlife. And the afterlife, as shown here, is one that has very palpable connections. It is not necessarily a type of afterlife vision that is overtly religious in nature. On the contrary, I think there are efforts being made, one can sense efforts being made that are trying to present this vision of the afterlife without any direct reference to religion or any religious connotations. Instead, this version of the afterlife seems to be focused on the palpable and the type of quote-unquote real-life experience of, say, checking into a hotel or watching TV in one's hotel room, going to a restaurant and wanting to order a breakfast or something, and going to the office and meeting someone and having to do paperwork or something of that sort. And so this type of process-related situational comedy, this type of true-to-life type of terms that are embellishing this particular version of the afterlife, make for a very interesting viewing fare indeed, because we are presented with a type of vision of the afterlife or version of the afterlife that I think can be said to be quite unique. It's setting up a lot of situational comic elements, but also in its own terms, it's setting up a very unique vision of the afterlife, or what happens after one dies. And I think in that inherently there are some fascinating philosophical implications that are indeed spoken about in some of the supplements of this particular Criterion release. So I want to suggest that there is so much packed in this particular work, and we are reminded of the fact that this is Albert Brooks. He is writer and director and star of this film. And so he is guiding us along in terms of his own vision of what the afterlife is and the building of the world. And there are many details that are embedded into the presentation that suggest a lot of thinking and contemplation on the part of the artists who are creating this film. So it's a very admirable effort on that part. On top of that, or coinciding with that, we have a lot of the funny moments, and there are so many funny comic moments in this work, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to try to watch it without reading too much about it, because there are a lot of surprises that are very funny and witty and delightful as well. So I hope you enjoy it as a first-time experience if you're watching it for the first time. And then it's also a very charming and warm romance, drama, comedy as well, and I think that's guided by the wonderful chemistry and the warmth that's given in terms of the relationship between the Albert Brooks character and the Meryl Streep character. And also there are some wonderfully presented implications of growth and development, as well as the type of protagonist-antagonist drama that's generated very, very wonderfully by the presence of characters played by Rip Torn and Lee Grant and others. So this is, I think, my way of trying to suggest that this is a really well-constructed, clever, witty, funny, warm, romantic comedy that is multi-layered, very textured, very clever, and so well represented in terms of a cinematic work in the hands of the artists, and then, of course, written and directed and starring Albert Brooks. This is the fascinating work, which is called Defending Your Life. This brings me to a discussion of the Criterion release right here. This is the Blu-ray, and it's at spine number 1071. This is purported to be based on a new 4K restoration of the film with 2.0 surround DTS HD master for the audio, and approved by director Albert Brooks, according to the back here. And I must say it looks and feels very nice and warm and pleasant. There is a particular look of this film that is, I think, striking a really lovely balance between the day-to-day stuff of the quote-unquote real-world elements, like the offices, the hotels, the buses, etc. And then there's also this ethereal element in the air as well. And so I think those two, the sort of real and the unreal, as it were, and I find those two balances, or those two elements, balanced quite well in terms of the visual presentation. I think the Criterion release here seems to support or enhance those elements in a way that's very visually visually pleasing to the eye and very pleasing to the ear when one watches and listens and experiences this film. So this is, I think, a really nice addition to have. And then as far as the supplements that are included in this Criterion release go, there are a number of them. There are, I think, by my count, 3 supplements. And so we also have the essay, and I'll get to that momentarily. But first of all, in terms of the supplements that are included, with this release, first we have a 2020 discussion between Albert Brooks and Robert Weide, and this is approximately 28 minutes. This is a great discussion because it's, of course, focusing in on Albert Brooks and his interpretation of the work, or the inspiration for certain elements of the work, some anecdotal information about certain choices that he made as a writer and director, as the creator of this world, and also as the creator of this film, and also the star of this film. and also working with some of the actors that are involved, for example, Meryl Streep, and the importance that her character has in the context of the film, and also in the way in which her presence somehow inspires the Albert Brooks character as well. And so I find this is a really great conversation for a number of reasons. First of all, you're getting great insights into the fascinating nature of the film itself, and as I was trying to suggest earlier, this is so wonderfully rich in terms of the textual nature of the film and the multi-layered aspect of the film. And so it's really wonderful to get some information as to what Albert Brooks was thinking of and what he was trying to go for, the type of choices that he wanted to employ in terms of, for example, presenting this type of version of the afterlife that is maybe not necessarily focusing on direct religious or moral implications of certain versions of the afterlife, but rather focusing in on something else which might be said to be more quote-unquote practical or more existential. And I'll get to that with a discussion of another supplement momentarily. But this is the notion of the idea of focusing in on the idea of fear. And if a person felt a sense of fear during one's own life and how one dealt with that, and that being the focus of the tribunal process judgment that is at the core of this film in terms of the conceit of the version of the afterlife anyway. And so this discussion by Albert Brooks as to some of the reasoning behind that, I think is very helpful and insightful. And as I say, it adds to a further allure and a reminder of, again, just how rich and complex this work is. So I must say that this is a really valuable conversation to engage with and to listen to. I should say also, as a point of, say, criterion or supplement presentation, this is what I think to be, it's a remote conversation. I don't think they're in the same room because of certain circumstances involving the current world health crisis at the moment. So my understanding is that it's recorded remotely, and so sometimes with remote conversations you could have like Zoom conversations or things of that sort, so one person on one side and the other person on the other side. But something about this, the way that the footage is edited together, is really fascinating. It's edited in a way that the people that are participating, Robert Weide and Albert Brooks, they're facing each other, and so it cuts to one person, it cuts to the other, it cuts to one person, it cuts back to the other. It's giving the illusion that they're in the same room or that they're facing each other having a conversation. And so that's a very clever touch in terms of how to present these types of supplements and remote conversations. A very clever touch, I must say. So anyway, that's the first supplement. It's a great one, so please check it out if you can. Again, the discussion between Albert Brooks and Robert Weide about defending your life, approximately 28 minutes. And then continuing on, we have a number or a selection of interviews from 1991, and this is from Kirk and Chase TV. This is approximately 12 minutes overall. And we have Albert Brooks, and we have certain interview comments that he's giving, again, about the film during the time of its release, or around the time of its release, 1991. Also, we have comments from Rip Torn, who plays a very key role in the film. And also we have comments from Lee Grant, who also plays a very key role in the film. And so it's wonderful to get a sense of Rip Torn's perspective, Lee Grant's perspective, and also Albert Brooks. And I should point out that I think in the earlier supplement we got some insights into what it was that Albert Brooks was considering when he wanted to cast, say, Rip Torn and Lee Grant in these particular roles that are, as I say, very important in the function of the plot, but also thematically in terms of this version of the afterlife. And so it's wonderful to get those comments from an earlier supplement and then to hear directly from Rip Torn about his view of the film, his take on working with Albert Brooks and the rest of the cast and crew, and Lee Grant as well. Her character is very fascinating, and she brings a lot of life and gravitas to this very important role. And then to hear her take on the role and the perspective that she brings to it is also very fascinating and very valuable. So this is another great supplement to have, again, current with the time of the film's release from 1991. This is approximately 12 minutes. So once again, please check this out if you can. And then we have a very interesting one-on-one discussion with Donna Bowman, and this is recorded in 2020, and this is called Spending Time in Judgment City, Donna Bowman on the Afterlife. And this is approximately 21 minutes. She is a theologian and scholar and film critic, and she is an expert and admirer of this particular work, Defending Your Life. This is an utterly fascinating and sublime discussion that she is giving, and for many reasons. So first of all, she is talking about her admiration and fascination with this film from a type of theological perspective, or perhaps more concretely put, from the perspective of its vision or version of the afterlife as it's being presented in cinematic terms. So she is, I think, lauding and really celebrating the fact that this is a version that is dealing with palpable, accessible, contextual terms, as I was referring to earlier: hotels, buses, Judgment City as a type of place where you can go to a restaurant and have food without the risk of consequence, or you can go bowling or watch TV, watch soap operas, and that sort of thing. So, and also the procedural aspect, the paperwork aspect of a lot of the office scenes or the trial tribunal scenes, etc. So she is emphasizing the point, I think, really, really well about how the afterlife version of this film is presented not in these, not in a type of heaven or hell type of conception, but rather in these quote-unquote contexts that are very much feel like true to life or things of daily existence. And so that leads to the ability, or perhaps a potential ability, of a viewer to access the world even more. And I think that's very important too, because the world is setting up, or the cinema, the work is setting up a world that has a number of rules, and we as viewers have to understand and keep up with the rules as they're being presented to us. So I think this idea of accessing the world in a very easy to understand way helps us, the viewer, to keep up with the rules as they're being presented to us. I think this is a really clever conceit as it's being presented by Albert Brooks, and also as it's being described, or as it's being commented upon by Donna Bowman here. So that's a really great aspect of this discussion. And then she goes into a really great conversation. Well, I mean, it was already great to begin with, and then she continues on with her excellent accounts of how this is a very interesting version of the afterlife, in that she is remarking about how it seems to be focusing in on a number of aspects. For example, the role of pleasure and sensory satisfaction, and she uses the term also pleasure or embodiment, and this is expressed very concretely in a lot of the scenes, the Albert Brooks scene in the afterlife itself, but also how we see him looking back and the things that we understand his character values, in terms of we see him buying a car, we see him enjoying material things, and not in any type of moral judgment way, but in just a way that is presenting this character and who he is. And so this is very important for Donna Bowman, because it leads her into a discussion of how this film can be said to be a type of existentialist philosophical text in a way. And here she introduces this idea of reading this in this way by reminding us that this film is also dealing with hierarchy and class distinctions, the idea of the different hotels, Meryl Streep's character's hotel versus Albert Brooks' character's hotel, and there's a different sense of say, the value or the price class, as it were. And the idea, too, going back to an earlier comment, how this version of the afterlife does not seem to be focusing in on a sense of morality, but rather it is focusing in on a very key aspect and a very understandable aspect of the human condition, and how it seems to be purporting or suggesting that in order to be able to move on to the next world, or the next stage, as it were, one has to prove at this juncture that one was able to confront fear in one's own life with a sense of, say, dignity that is judged by this particular tribunal. So Donna Bowman uses this to suggest that this is a presentation of a type of afterlife that is relying on not a sense of morality or moral-based judgment, but rather an examination of the human condition as what she calls, or what she terms to be, a universal subset of challenges. And how this is expressed directly by the Albert Brooks character's traits, and also the moments of his life that we view in the particular trial itself, and also how we understand as viewers his role and the thematic significance that his character has in the context of the entire story itself. And so this sets up really, really fascinatingly Donna Bowman's discussion about how she can see this film as a type of existentialist text, because she recognizes or identifies a lot of points of the film and the themes and the characters that she can say are linked to an existentialist philosophy or presentation. So she uses, for example, or she cites, for example, Kierkegaard and Sartre, and she gives us a very, I think, succinct and easy to understand general overview or introduction into the basic differences, according to her, as to their respective viewpoints on existentialist thought. And so she reminds us, or she indicates to us, that Kierkegaard's existentialist thought was marked by his Christianity, and then whereas the 20th century thinkers, existentialist thinkers, were atheists. And so and she then reminds us of, say, Sartre's text, No Exit, and the idea that hell is perhaps other people, and how, what she phrases it so well, hell is other people, and so therefore the idea or the concept is there's this inability to pronounce judgment on oneself because others are pronouncing judgment on you instead. And so there is that concept that she reminds us of. And then also she also suggests to us that we could look at this as a type of existentialist text because of the idea of judgment, of the idea of, in the context of Albert Brooks's character, there is this way in which other characters are very important to him. It seems like he is valuing what other people think about him, and so there is already inherent in that a sense of judgment. He is perhaps judging others, and he is seeking welcoming judgment from others about him. He is also, I think, very paradoxically, wary of judgment. He seems to be uneasy about being judged. He is, after all, the focus of this particular tribunal process, and so he seems to be uneasy or on edge or nervous. And I think this comment or observation by Donna Bowman is really, really brilliant about how there is this maybe contradictory nature in him. And I think this lends to a sense of perhaps an unspoken unease, and also how his character, and indeed the other characters, say the Meryl Streep character and the Lee Grant character as examples, seem to be focusing in on this idea, or let me take a step back. I'm sorry, let me take a step back and I'll get to those other characters in a moment. Another thing Donna Bowman that she brings up so well in terms of the basic differences that she explains in terms of Kierkegaard existentialist thought and the 20th century thinkers is that there's this idea of Christianity or belief or non-belief in God. But in any event, there is also the idea that, for example, one cannot know what is lying beyond. And so one can only know via the bounds of this particular existence. Or another way to put it, as she does, one is stuck in this particular mode of existence. And everyone is, all things being equal, everyone will be confronted with that same wall that prevents one from actually knowing what will happen when one traverses it and goes beyond. And so there's this interesting unifying or equalizing factor of the fact that there is something unknown inherently in this deep fundamental question, what lies beyond? And so this, I think, forms a really great basis for another type of wonderfully placed contradiction, inherent contradiction, in that there are these classes or there are these types of judgment strata that are presented in the world of Albert Brooks. And indeed, Donna Bowman links certain aspects of this to various forms of Kierkegaard existential thought, like the idea of a materialist-based satisfaction and referring to, the aesthetic stage and then the ethical stage, etc. But the idea how Albert Brooks' character seems to be embodying these various moments, say, of the aesthetic stage and the value that he places on the material or the satisfaction on a type of materialism. And not casting any moral judgment on that aspect of his character, but that's the way he's presented in terms of certain moments of his life where he wants to buy a first-class ticket on an airplane, or he wants to buy a BMW or something of that sort, or he wants to enjoy a nice meal, a large breakfast, etc. And then she also ties in the Meryl Streep character in terms of an idealized form or sense of being or understanding. And then the Lee Grant character, Donna Bowman, ties into the idea of growth and development. She is not just a quote-unquote villain or antagonist. She actually, and she's not just a source of the dramatic tension, although her character provides those elements really strikingly well. She is also functioning as a type of agent for change or growth, vis-a-vis the Albert Brooks character, because we realize that her examination and her pressing of various points of Albert Brooks's life, vis-a-vis fear, did he experience fear? Was he scared at these points in his life? These are really meant, as Donna Bowman suggests, these are meant to try to provoke a type of growth or a sense of self in the context of his character, and whether or not he will be able to develop or grow. And these elements are also part of the overall existentialist philosophical perspective that Donna Bowman describes. And so this is, I think, a really important discussion for someone like myself, who I'm not an expert or a student in philosophical thought or history of development of existentialism and existentialist philosophical thought. But when I'm hearing this particular talk from Donna Bowman, I realize that this is a very densely packed film, an incredibly well thought out film whose details are so cleverly established. And listening to her talk and her observations and about how this is a type of perspective on the afterlife that is very maybe innovative, for the reasons that she was trying to point out in the context of theology and also in the context of philosophy, this is utterly, utterly fascinating. This is one of the best supplements that I've heard so far this year. And she also brings up a number of really interesting observations as well about how this is a film that is taking the viewpoint or perspective or approach on life about how the judgment is essentially based upon the sum total of one's decisions throughout one's life. And also how this afterlife version or vision is focusing on what is to come, and the importance of wanting to go beyond and go to the next stage. And so this is an interesting change, or this is an interesting innovation, according to Donna Bowman, because usually, according to her take on other afterlife-related films, the focus tends to be at maybe a moral judgment-based one that is seeking to go back. But here we have one that is not a moral-based judgment, but rather one that is based on an examination of one's life and the sum total of one's decisions in this existentialist viewpoint textual reading. And it's also looking forward. In other words, the characters want to go forward rather than go back. And so this switching of the goals, as it were, is, according to Donna Bowman, another interesting novelty or innovation in the way that this is presenting the afterlife, at least in cinematic terms. And so these and other observations from her, I think, are key, and they really enhance a viewing of this film and a reading of this film. Now, I don't claim to know everything that she is referring to in this particular discussion, and so, but I am fascinated by the points that she brings, and she is presenting him in a way that makes it very easy to understand for someone, say, in a position like mine, where I'm not a student of philosophy, but still I think she presents her points in such a wonderful and easy to understand manner. And at the same time, creating insights and observations that are incredible, absolutely incredible. So I cannot stress enough just how much I enjoyed this particular supplement, and so I recommend it wholeheartedly for anyone who is interested in this film, and also the ways in which this film could be seen to be a very innovative take on the cinematic expression of a type of afterlife, again in the hands of Albert Brooks, the filmmaker. So this is the discussion with Donna Bowman. This is approximately 21 minutes, so please check it out if you can. And then we have the insert, which I've taken the liberty of removing before the start of this video, and so I've taken it out from the inside. I should point out that this artwork design is a very interesting one. We have, of course, the front and back, which is of the Blu-ray there. Then we have the fold-out. The fold-out itself, it has a number of pictures and shots from the film, but they're presented in a very clever way. So we have, for example, here on the cast and credits portion, we have Welcome to Judgment City. So it's carrying on the conceit of some of the jokes of the film. And also I should point out, in that line, we have inside, this is where the booklet or the fold-out would go, and you can see there are some ones and zeros here on the back, and that's also, I think, a very clever reference to a particular joke that's in the film. So this is, in an interesting way, a type of interactive presentation of this particular physical media item. It is a fold-out, and so I've mentioned it before, and I'll say it again. I'm not a big fan of the fold-outs. I'd much rather have the staple booklet because I think it allows for more space and more text. But be that as it may, we have this fold-out. And I should point out before I go any further, the art directors are Eric Skillman, Sarah Habibi, and designer F. Ron Miller. And so it's a very interesting art presentation and design. One of the great highlights, or another great highlight, though, in terms of this fold-out and this presentation by Criterion overall, is the essay, which is called Real Afterlife, by Ari Aster. And so Ari Aster is a filmmaker. He's also a great admirer of this film and also the works of Albert Brooks. And so I really recommend that you read the essay by Ari Aster, again called Real Afterlife. Perhaps I suggest that you watch the film first and then you can read the essay. I think that way you can avoid the risk of spoilers, and also you can get into a lot of the details, a lot of the great details that Ari Aster is talking about in his great essay. So please check it out if you can. So my friends, that is it as far as my overall impressions or my discussions and thoughts and comments on this particular release from Criterion, Defending Your Life. So what do you think? Please feel free to let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are of this particular film. As always, I'd love to hear what it is you have to say. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much for your time, as always. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.